What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today's video we're looking at the pagan and Wiccan ceremony known as Handfasting, which is essentially a Wiccan or a pagan wedding. There are a lot of pages on learn religions that you can go to learn about this stuff. I'm on the one titled Hold a Handfasting Ceremony, and then in parentheses, simple. So this is going to give you an idea of the structure of it. Just quickly check at the bottom. Do they have any links to other ones? Yeah, there's a bunch of other ones down the bottom. Actually, let's go to this one, all about handfastings and pagan weddings. That's probably going to give us a little bit more about what we want to know in this video. Alright. So we're going to learn in this video about the origins of it, to things like broom jumping, to how you select your cake. You can also learn about magical handfasting favors to give your guests, and find out what you need to ask the person who's going to perform your ceremony. Because if you're just going to have the ceremony and that be that, and then just go down to like the court and have them witness you signing the document, which is a perfectly acceptable way to do it. If you're not wanting to do that though, you do need someone who's actually able to officiate weddings to do this. And so generally, if you're in a coven, you'll generally find that your high priest will generally have gone through the process of getting themselves that accreditation so that they can host official weddings for the coven. So the first thing that we sort of need to know is that handfasting was actually really common centuries ago in the British Isles, and then they sort of vanished for a while. Now it is seeing a rise in popularity, particularly obviously among Wiccan and pagan couples who are interested in getting married. Many pagan and Wiccan couples choose to have a handfasting ritual instead of a traditional wedding ceremony. I had friends that used that as sort of their engagement party, and they held that on the last day of winter. The idea being that a year and a day later, on the first day of spring, that they would get married. Unfortunately, the date of their handfasting was August 31st, 2019, and then COVID shut everything down. So they were unable to actually do that. But yeah, so it's not specifically having to be a wedding ceremony. It could simply just be used as sort of an official ceremony as part of an engagement party, for instance. In some cases, it says here, it may simply be ceremonial, a couple just declaring their love for one another without the benefit of a state license. For other couples, it can be tied with a state marriage certification issued by a legally authorised party, such as a clergy person or a JP, which is a Justice of the Peace. Either way, it's becoming more and more popular as pagan and Wiccan couples are seeing that there is an alternative to non-Christian weddings. and they obviously want, they want to have that same sort of big, lavish, church style wedding, but they don't believe in that particular deity, and not wanting to offend those people by holding their own beliefs within that place of worship. This is the other part that's really cool about having a hand fasting, that I didn't really mention here, is you can do these outdoors. A lot of things for pagans and Wiccans is the whole idea of getting back to nature. So if you want to go and have a wedding on the beach, you can go and do that and have that be a hand fasting. You can have a hand fasting, like a function center sort of thing in a rainforest if you wanted. You could do it on top of a mountain. You could. It's not so much about the place, whereas I think for particularly the traditional style for Christian weddings is it has to be in a church, and churches don't move, unfortunately. So how to have a magical ceremony. For many people of pagan faiths, the time of year to have a hand fasting ceremony, as I said, is in spring. Obviously the representation of new life coming forth in spring and getting married and starting that new life together is very sort of poetic, but it does also sort of bode well for nurturing and growing together, and that even in the difficult times, in the winters of your relationship, you are always going to be able to come back to a spring straight away afterwards, and continue growing as the cycle of the seasons continues. So it is very poetic. If you're lucky enough to have someone you love enough to want to get married with them and you choose to have a hand fasting, there are a few things you may want to keep in mind while planning your ceremony, and there is a link on this page for planning your ceremony. For choosing your cake, if you're holding a hand fasting instead of a traditional wedding, you may want to do something special instead of just having a traditional cake. Obviously the cake is a particularly time-honored tradition that goes back many centuries. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, you might want to try something that reflects that history. Jumping the broom is a really cool, fun, interesting part of hand fastings. Not necessarily an integral part. Putting it in there is always fun, because it goes sort of along with the popularity of hand fasting ceremonies, and broom jumping has also seen a resurgence in interest as well, and this idea of a besom wedding. So a besom wedding, like I said, is a ceremony referred to as jumping the broom, with the broom representing the threshold of the home. It says here that it probably originated in medieval Wales, but was commonly used as the only form of wedding available to enslaved African Americans in the US as well. So there's a fun little bit of trivia for that as well, if you want to sort of honour that history as well. If one or both of you have any sort of ancestry in Wales or as African Americans, this might be something that you want to include for the sole purpose of appeasing the ancestors, because ancestral magic is also quite a big thing for pagans and Wiccans alike. Throughout history, nearly all cultures have had gods and goddesses associated with love and marriage. And though there are a couple that are male, like Eros in ancient Greece and his Roman counterpart Cupid, most are female, because the institution of marriage has long been viewed as the domain of women. So Aphrodite, Hera, the goddess of the home and the hearth in ancient Greece is a woman as well, Hestia. Persephone, Demeter's daughter and the bride of Hercules, Hades. Too many people's names starting with H. She's the deity of spring in Greece, in ancient Greece. So all of them female. I do know that there's an ancient Irish Celtic god who's a god of love that's male. But if you're doing a working related to love, or you wish to honour a particular deity as part of your hand fasting, calling on those gods is sort of encouraged. But that does ultimately come down to you and the particular deities that you worship as part of your belief system. Now for me, I'm someone who's interested by mythology. There's only a very select few myths in ancient Rome that are completely just Roman. Most of their other myths are based in ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, the Celts, the Norse. So while I could sort of pick and choose the deities that I like, because that's entirely up to you, I've decided to go with ancestry, and so that's led me to the Celtic gods, which is how I know about Angus being a god of love. If you are going to have a hand fasting, you may want to work with your pagan clergy person on the writing of your vows. This is where the link to that simple ceremony that we're going to look at is, and you can take that as just sort of like a template and change anything and everything that you would like to, so that it fits for you. Obviously there'll be places where like insert name here goes, or insert deity being honoured goes. If your deities are simply just your ancestors, then you would sort of invoke their names and ask their spirits to be present instead of the gods instead, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. There's no one way to do it, whereas traditional Christian weddings, there's really only a one-size-fits-all sort of a deal. There's only a certain amount that you can personalize those, whereas your hand fasting is completely what you want it to be. Who can perform them? As they're becoming more popular, pagan and Wiccan couples are seeing that there is indeed an alternative, as I said before, to the non-Christian weddings and the courthouse weddings. But a common question obviously is who can actually perform that ceremony itself. There are several options for legally binding wedding celebrants, including a JP or a Unitarian minister. And then again, you can just be, if you have a coven, it could just be the high priest within your coven is also certified as a JP and can perform that for you. For my friends, because it was just their engagement and then we're going to have that legally binding ceremony later, their high priestess, in their case, didn't have to be accredited. So yeah, having the ceremony, and there's a lot that goes into it. They had a bit where they joined arms, and then they had a rope sort of tied around their arms in a way that sort of reminded me of that the Unbreakable Vow scene in Half-Blood Prince, which, when you think about it, was essentially a magical wedding. They were making a vow that, you know, shouldn't be broken, which is what marriage is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a vow that you will never break. And so, yeah, it's no surprise that that was written to sort of invoke the imagery of a hand fasting. Wedding rings. It's perfectly fine if you just want to have, you know, a ring, but you can also, in Ireland they have the Clonard ring, which is sort of an all-around love ring, depending on which hand and which way the ring is facing, because it's sort of an asymmetrical design, so depending on which way it's facing, sort of lets you know at a glance what their marital status is. You can also get the like wrist bracelet ones that sort of just look like a incomplete circle, with each end having like an animal head on it. I believe theirs had wolves. I believe it was wolves on theirs. So yeah, there are a couple of options there as well. Wedding dress shopping, you've obviously got a couple of options there as well, because, you know, like while white is just all around a colour symbolising purity, there's no you know, like you can really go with whatever colours you sort of choose, and again, you've got some options there as well. So there is a lot for you guys to have a look at if you would like to. I'm just going to sort of quickly run you guys through what that simple ceremony looks like. So to begin with, the what do we got here? So yeah, so this is a simple ceremony that you can make adjustments to based on your needs and your spiritual tradition. Avoid leaving a bunch of blank spaces. Or, you know, the bride's and groomsmaids. Sorry, bride's and groom's name. They're going to pretend that this ceremony is for a woman named Ivy and a man named Mark. I'm just going to say bride and groom when those come up. Being hand-fasted by a high priestess, which is HP. So the high priest or high priestess would start off sort of welcoming the families. You know, we're all here today to see the bride and the groom join hands and be out together before the ceremony begins. They'll sort of consecrate the ground and make it a sacred place, and then they will cast a circle. They can either do that out loud or in silence. Once that's been done, they'll let everyone know that the circle has been cast and that it's now a sacred space. And then they will consecrate the rings by the 4 elements or any other method called for by your particular tradition. There's a big script here. I'll just sort of read you the first paragraph here. It says, the circle itself is an infinite thing. It's magical and never ending, never changing, and yet always adaptable. A ring with no beginning and no conclusion. Like the circle, true love itself is infinite. It goes on, knowing no boundaries or restrictions. It flourishes and blooms in the light and in the dark, laying down no ultimatums, making no demands. Love in its infinite form is something that cannot be forced and it cannot be taken away. It's a gift we give ourselves and an honour we give to others from the bottom of our hearts and souls. It then continues by saying, when two people come together and give one another this gift, this most sacred gift of all, it's certain the universe is sitting back and smiling upon us, laughing and showering us with every possible blessing. And then you would continue by saying, the High Priestess would continue by saying that today is the day we celebrate the love of the bride and the groom. They are two people who are halves of a whole, two souls coming together to form a single being, two hearts beating in a single rhythm. They are together as one, and so they will now light a candle of unity to show the universe that they indeed are one light burning in the darkness, and then the couple together would light their unity candle. The High Priest or High Priestess would then continue afterwards, sort of asking the infinite light of the divine to shine down upon them in whatever capacity that takes, whether that's just the ancestors, whether that's particular chosen gods, that they would be invoked there, or if it's simply just very basic sort of, I believe something's out there but I don't know its name. You might be calling on the triple goddess and the horned god, who are sort of the stock characters, I suppose, for pagan and Wicca traditions. The reason that is because a lot of goddesses throughout many different cultures were often multifaceted. Even Athena was multifaceted. She was both seen as a tactician and very wise, but also as a warrior. But also she was a weaver, and would weave things together. So she was a craftsperson, and she was, a bit of a prophet and a warrior. So she had three things. And then on the other side of that, the horned god sort of represents what was sort of seen as the masculine traits of being sort of very wild, very strong. They were the ones that would go out into the wilderness and hunt and gather and farm, while the women stayed at home in the house, and weaving things and making things, and looking after the children and cooking and cleaning and all sorts of things. Obviously, that's no longer the case. But those characters have sort of survived as sort of the stock characters because they do share a lot in common with a whole bunch of other gods and goddesses. They would then bless the marriage with gifts from the east, such as new beginnings that come each day with the rising sun, communication of the heart, body, mind, and soul, with gifts from the south, the light of the heart, the heat of passion, and the warmth of a loving home, gifts from the west, the rushing excitement of a raging river, the soft and pure cleansing of a rainstorm, and a commitment as deep as the ocean itself. Obviously, you would change these for wherever you are, or you would pick this particular things that represent the place that you're getting married. So if you're getting married in the oceans to the north, you might put the ocean in the north category. But then gifts of the north, a solid foundation on which to build our lives, abundance and growth of your home, and stability to be found by holding one another at the end of the day. Now again, you could have a look at sort of the geological things and all that sort of stuff and rearrange those that way, or you might want to go with the 4 elements and their general directions, according to compasses. but even then, again, water will point to water, earth will point to land. So if the water close to you, if the closest body of water is north of you, then that's where you would put that, and then land would be its opposite. And then air and fire, you might choose to put, in that case, fire on the east because that's when the sun rises, and air in the west because you enjoy the cool evening breeze or something. Completely up to you, completely changeable in there. The HP would continue by speaking to the bride and groom and letting them know that those blessings will help them on their journey that they begin today. They would then specify that they are, however, only tools, which must be used together to create light, strength, and the infinite energy now and forever of a love you both richly deserve. Obviously speaking to the bride and groom then. They would then bid you look to one another, the bride and the groom. They would then speak to the groom first to please place the ring on the bride's finger, and the vows would then fit in there, and then the same would happen for the bride second. This again is kind of changeable. If you feel within your relationship strongly that together that the bride should go first, then by all means, that is completely up to you. No one's saying that you have to put the woman second. If you want to put the woman first and make the groom go second, by all means, go for it. It is completely up to you. After they both respond in the affirmative, the whole reason we're holding this is so they can respond in the affirmative. The HP would then sort of continue. The vows of love have been spoken, and ask you now to cross your hands over each other and take one another's hand. They would then wrap a cord around the bride and groom's wrists, binding them together loosely and tying a knot. Again, that unbreakable vow scene gives you the same sort of idea of the shape that it would take. The HP would let the bride and the groom know that the ribbon symbolizes so much. It's your life, your love, and the eternal connection that the two of you have found with one another. The ties of this hand fasting are not formed by the ribbons or even by the knots connecting them. They are formed instead by your vows, by your pledge, your souls, your hearts, which are all now bound together as one. As one last bond, you may kiss the bride. They are then told to face their family and friends, who are obviously bearing witness to such an occasion. And then they would, the high priest or high priestess would then announce the newly married Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Jones, Wilson, or whatever. You would then dismiss the sacred space and close the circle, sending all loving energy towards the newly handfast couple, so that they may begin their life together with all of the collective's blessings and warm wishes. And the HP would then go around the circle, dismissing the quarters. Once it has been dismissed, you would then be able to sort of leave the sacred space. There is also a tip here that says, if you wish, ask friends and family members to call the quarters, with someone standing at each cardinal point to represent the 4 directions. In that way, you could have if you have 4 bridesmaids and 4 groomsmen, you might have a pair of each standing at the 4 corners as sort of the representations for those cardinal points, as an idea. But yeah, hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. And if you did enjoy this one, please give it a big thumbs up. I will leave the links down below. And until next time, guys, keep your heads good.